Did you know that the name Petit Verdot is an anagram for totted viper? A totted viper is a phrase used to express the notion of a legless, narrow-bodied, particularly unstable creature. Now, there is a certain degree of irony to this because of the 5 dominant red Bordeaux cultivars, Petit Verdot is arguably one of the most broad-bodied, and because of its staunch structure and rich, inky, concentrated color, it's probably one of the least totted of them all. The name Petit Verdot means little green one because the damn sucker takes so long to ripen, and it was this reluctance to ripen that led to it being uprooted so much in Bordeaux in favor of faster ripening cultivars like Cabernet Franc and Merlot. Fortunately, in the New World, there are less judgmental and more accepting countries, South Africa being amongst the more prominent. This is because in South Africa, we can ripen it with ease, and also it seems to deliver much softer tannins down south. Thirdly, it also has very low levels of pyrazines. And pyrazines are a group of chemicals that can deliver grassy, herby, sometimes vegetal elements in the wines from Bordeaux, which can put Bordeaux purists in a mood. The relevance of all this is admittedly tenuous because today's wine only has 18% Petit Verdot in it. Still, it is worth mentioning because the contribution of Petit Verdot in Bordeaux blends in South Africa is seemingly growing in both quantity and quality amongst certain winemaking sororities. But what about the other 82%, you might ask? Well, today's hand drink solo wine of the day is the Lourens River 2016 Bordeaux blend made by Helderberg heroes Morgenster Estate. Morgenster is about 300 years old, but it was in 1992 that it was bought by the Bertrand family. And for the first 2 decades, the estate was run and led by the founder and pioneering visionary Giulio Bertrand, from which the range of Giulio wines get their name. But now that the new generation has taken over, the Morgenster range of wines is getting a sort of restructuring as well as an aesthetic facelift. Morgenster have always expressed a bit of tension between the modern and the classic. When they started out, it was probably fair to say that their aesthetic was rather classic, but their experimentation with Italian cultivars like Sangiovese and Nebbiolo made their winemaking rather modern. Now, there seems to be a slight shifting in those emphases. The winemaking team, known previously for their progressive experimentation with unusual cultivars, is returning to a position of classicism, in that they are more sure than ever that their best wines are the classic Bordeaux cultivars. Then the marketing team are taking their rather classic aesthetic and shifting it to a far more modern look and feel with bolder colors and more geometric shapes. And so it is that the tension between modern and classic still exists within the Morgenster brand, but the way in which they have been expressed have now just been switched around. And for what it's worth, as a grape hunter who goes into spasm for their unusual wines made from Sangiovese and Nebbiolo, I have to admit their Cabernet Sauvignon and their Cabernet Franc in particular are tasting incredible right now. But what of today's Lourens River Blend 2016? Well, the first thing to note is that it is a 2016, which means that you get all sorts of delightfully tertiary elements that you wouldn't get if it was, say, a 2020. The other thing to note is that while winemaker Henry Kotze has been at Mulderbosch for a few years already, back in 2016, he was very much the big man on campus at Morgenster, and so he is the winemaker that we have to thank for the wine today. Now, when we give it a sniff, well, as I said, it may look squeaky clean and modern on the outside, but on the inside, the nose is far moodier than the label suggests. There are these lovely deep notes of black currant and also soaked maraschino cherries, but then there's herbs and spices as well. There's a sort of fennel note, or maybe it's even aniseed, and then cedar and some thyme and a lovely sweet tobacco leaf. Those secondary notes I mentioned at the end make sense because this wine has been matured in oak for 18 months, of which 25% of those barrels were made of new oak. Now, when we give it a sip, well, contrary to what the nose implied, which led with black fruits, the palate on this wine leads with delightfully fresh, vibrant, of sour cherry elements, and these are then followed later by that softer, riper blackcurrant that we smelled up front on the nose. And then, as the nose suggested, those aniseed and cedar notes pop up towards the finish. One thing to note about the wine is that the tannins are incredibly well integrated. And this shouldn't be a surprise because, as we said, this is a 2016 vintage, which means it is already 7 years old by the time it gets to the consumer. And on that note, the number of estates who are cellar aging their wines is getting fewer and fewer. So you really need to snap up wines like these while you can, especially if you don't have the discipline or facility to cellar your wines for long term. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. But if you have any questions about Morgenster, then drop a comment on the site and I'll try and get back to you. And if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon and subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo YouTube channel, where we publish at least 6 videos each month. We're talking about wine science, wine history, unusual cultivars, classic cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars coming out of the dynamic South African wine.